This is a simple project. I really wanted something small but handy. A belt knife is only about 5 inches overall and does a few things. I wanted a cutting edge, a flathead screwdriver, and a bottle opener for beers. I drew up the design. Initially it had a longer blade, but I have loads of these, so I'm going to go with a stubby blade. I always make multiple copies once I arrive at the pattern that I'm going to make. This allows me to change if I need to, or to duplicate if something happens to the original pattern. Here's a bar of random ladder Damascus. It's about 3/16 inch thick. I had this laying around, figured I'd use this. What I start with is a whole bunch of 3M 77 glue, cover the area thick with this, and then place my pattern and then smooth the pattern down. Once this is adhered, it stays in place. There's no movement at all, and it tolerates quite a bit of abuse, and even doesn't respond to heating up while grinding or dipping in water while trying to cool off the blade. So I really would recommend you do this. It's much better than machine die, whatever. Here I'm cutting the knife out. I have a metal bandsaw. The reason for the plywood plate is that it prevents any pieces, small pieces, from falling through the hole and jamming into the roller bearings and the guides on the lower part of the blade. This makes everything work much better. This is actually sped up. My blade does not cut this fast. I wish it did. But I prefer to cut out as much as I possibly can. I really don't like grinding loads and loads of extra metal off my blanks. There is some waste doing it this way, but overall it's relatively minor. The pattern shows some possible options I was going to put on, but in the end I decided to just go with a straightforward blade with no handle material. Here's the grinding. I use a 80 grit ceramic belt. You could go at a coarser grit, but this seems to work overall quite well. I frequently will cool the blade down. It gets pretty hot. This is a batter grinder. It's about 30 years old. It's worked perfectly all these years. I've never had any problems with it at all. All I do is change the contact belts. I've had not to do anything with the motor or any other part of it. I use this flat platen along with the support most of the time. I square these up so that I'm getting a right 90-degree angle all the time while I'm grinding. I'll grind close to the line here. I'll do some finish grinding later on. These are the sparks that come out of the bottom of the machine. I have a 5-gallon bucket filled with water to collect these so they're not going all over my feet or over the floor of the shop. Quite a fire hazard. Here, just a little bit more grinding. Now I'm going to be drilling the holes. The first one is for the bottle opener hole. I start with a 1/8 inch drill. And the hole for the circle is will be a 7/8 inch hole. I was actually going to put a magnifying glass or piece in there, but I really couldn't get one to fit right, so I just left this opened in this version. But it's a handy area to hold on to. This is a 1/4 inch bit. This seemed to work out quite well for the bottle opener, and the area will take a little bit of fine shaping, but it does work quite well. And for this larger area, I have a selection of step bits going all the way up from 1/2 to about 1 1/4 inches. So I just use these. Some of them are got a little bit dull. I'm going to have to sharpen them up. But you can see the pattern held in place. It's totally trashed at this point. But if I had to replace it, I could easily do this. But I'm far enough along, I really don't need to do that. So the only way to remove the pattern is with acetone. You have to put a pretty hefty amount to essentially soak through the paper and melt the glue underneath, and then use some rather vigorous scrubbing to remove all the glue. But it comes out quite well. Here I'm just touching up the area I want to cut out to make for the bottle opener part. You could do this all with files, but I just took it to the metal bandsaw and did it that way. This is actually how slow my saw cuts. I think I'm ready for a new blade at this point. But I'm also taking my time. I really don't want to mess this up. You only get one shot at it. You can't really add metal, especially to Damascus. It really looks pretty terrible. So I'd rather be slow and careful than to have to repeat the whole process all over again and waste a piece of Damascus steel. The Damascus I'm using is a combination of 1095 and 15 and 20. So I'll touch this up with the sander and a file to get the dimensions I want. The best way to do that is to actually work on a bottle cap and see if it works. Here I'm doing some just finish grinding before heat treating. I also made these marks along the top edge at 1, 2, and 3 inches, and then areas in between at 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch. Here I'm heat treating. I heat treated at 1475 degrees and let it soak for at least 10 minutes and cooled it in oil. Important to slightly move the blade around while you're doing this so that all areas get cool. This is a fairly thick blade and small, so there's really very little chance of any warpage here. The only bad part about this is it comes out looking terrible, and you have to essentially sand off all of that material. Here I'm working on the edges. It's a very weird shape, but I'm using this wheel. Grinding wheel works actually very good. It's water, nothing gets hot, so you don't have to worry about losing the edge or your temper on it. Speaking of temper, after the blade was removed, it was tempered at 425 degrees for 2 hours, and that gives a temper of about a Rockwell of 61. Here's the blade all sanded down and polished before the etch again. And here it is after the etch. This is a fairly light etch. I'm going to be using this daily, and if you make a really deep edge, it tends to accumulate all kinds of debris and garbage. This was before I shaped the edge here. This, you may see this, I made a mistake of dipping with a welding rod, and the copper on the welding rod contaminated the metal and gave it that copper color. Here my grandson Ashton stopped by to help me with the leather work. I made a leather sheath for this. There's full details. I have actually a whole video on making a leather sheath. If you want to make one, You ought to take a look at that video. That's about as instructive as you can get. And the knife completed. A little bit of a shake there. But here's the pattern. Seems to work good. There's a sharp bevel. That's just to make it easier to sharpen the knife. This is meant to be a daily use knife and not to be any kind of an art piece. The screwdriver is very helpful for prying the lids off of cans, tops. Got a little bit more polishing to do before finally, but it's come along quite well. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please subscribe. Hopefully I'll be coming out with more videos in the near future.